Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to apologize for my voice. I happened to spend a little time at Game 5 of the NBA Finals, and it's not come back to me fully yet. But I do appreciate everybody being here. Before I get started, I certainly want to recognize Counselor Vanessa Hall Harper, who is here. Thank you, Counselor, for being here and for your leadership on this issue and so many others. I also want to recognize our Deputy Mayor, Crystal Reyes, who is also here. Members of our team here in the mayor's office and across the city. And as you can see, I am joined by members of our archeological and forensic teams, Dr. Carrie Stackelbeck, Dr. Phoebe Stubblefield, Ryan Peterson. Thank you all for being here today. I'm also joined by Allison Wild of Intermountain Forensics, who's also here with Danny Helwig and a few members of their team. I saw Brenda. I was walking in. Brenda's right over here. Brenda, she'll speak in a little bit. She was also at the Thunder game, but her voice might be a little bit better than mine. But Brenda's been a longtime friend, and I'm glad she's here as a descendant of racist massacre victims and entrepreneurs on Black Wall Street. I do want to give a shout out to two of our employees here at the city who have spent a lot of time helping us get here in addition to Deputy Mayor Reyes. That is Deputy Chief of Staff Brenton Todd, who's worked really hard to keep this work going in his time here at the city, and our Deputy City Administrator, James Wagner. And James has been a part of this from the very start. Kyra Carby, where is she? Is she here? There she is. Kyra, in addition to being a wonderful school board member for Tulsa Public Schools, she's also been incredibly instrumental, and thank you for being here and for all your work. We're gathered here today to share some incredible, important updates surrounding the 1921 Graves investigation. Earlier this month, during my Road to Repair announcement, I reaffirmed our commitment to the 1921 Graves investigation and included funding in this proposed budget that'll be voted on actually today. I firmly believe this work, combined with all of our other efforts, like the creation of the Greenwood Trust, are bringing about a future where closure and repair are possible. It is in that spirit, the spirit of closure and repair, that today we're announcing some of the answers we've been waiting for a long time. Answers that were only found because of the people behind me and in the community who kept pushing to ensure that it happened. I have three announcements that we're going to share with you today. The first thing we're announcing is the release of the 2024 field report from Oak Lawn Cemetery. This report details the findings from the physical investigation team during their last excavation. There's a lot of details in the report, but what stands out to me is the fact that we have 5 individuals at Oak Lawn Cemetery who were victims of multiple gunshot wounds, and another who was a victim of 1 gunshot wound. These were all found by the physical investigation team and evaluated by Dr. Stubblefield. If you're counting, that is 6 burials with gunshot wounds. The majority of these burials are located on the west side of the cemetery. What this tells us is that we're in the right spot and we're getting closer and closer to the truth. Even with these new trauma victims, we still have not yet encountered the number of likely massacre victims who were purported to be buried at Oak Lawn based on death certificates and funeral home records. All of this, to me, means that we must return to Oak Lawn Cemetery, because we cannot, in good faith, turn our backs on the evidence and the work that's gotten us to this point. Dr. Steckelbeck will in a moment talk about the details of the findings and our intent to return to Oak Lawn in just a few minutes. But you can find the report right now, along with their excavation reports, at www.cityoftulsa.org/1921 On the genealogy and research side of things, we have some historic news to share. For those of you who may just be tuning into this, the work is, this work is made possible not just through everyone behind me, but from individuals in the community and the nation who have shared their stories, their family histories, their DNA, and their hearts with our team and with the historians dating back for decades. Last year, the sharing of this information led to the identification of the first victim of our search at Oak Lawn Cemetery, C.L. Daniel, a World War I veteran who was simply just trying to find his way home and got murdered in Tulsa during the massacre. Today, and the second item we're announcing, excuse me, is the second identification of a burial at Oak Lawn Cemetery, Burial 180. Burial 180 is a burial that the physical investigation team found last year. It is located just to the south and west of C.L. Daniel. Because of the work of Allison and her team, what they were able to do, and the contributions of people who were brave enough to share their stories and their DNA, we can now put a name to that burial, and it has been ID'd as George Melvin Gillespie. Allison's team is working to confirm George Gillespie's history, and if in fact he can be confirmed as a Tulsa race massacre victim. The manner of George Gillespie's death is unknown, but from the records that Allison's team has been able to gather, he died somewhere between 1920 and 1924. We also have a picture of George Gillespie that I think was in everybody's media packet, if I'm not mistaken. You can have a look at it. It's on the screen, I believe, online right now as well. But this is impactful because this is the first time we've been able to put a face to a name, and we've been able to identify a person with this work. Thank you, Mike. This is groundbreaking, and we're just so incredibly thankful for his family, for their engagement with this work. There's more that we need to do for George Gillespie. We need more information, first, so we can see how he died. We'll also be working with the state medical examiner to get his death certificate so that his family can decide what the next steps for him are. Today, in the third announcement, we've identified a Tulsa race massacre victim by the name of James Goings, a veteran who served in the United States Army. James Goings is the second new Tulsa race massacre victim that has been confirmed since the city's renewed search for answers. And we know that because the teams you see behind me aren't just scientists and forensic anthropologists and archaeologists, they're researchers, and they care deeply about the truth. The first information obtained on James Goings came through an information donor who had a family booklet stating that Mr. Goings was killed in the Tulsa race riot. Quote, upon receiving this information from the community, this team requested and received records from the National Archive and found a file for Mr. James Goings. There's a lot of information in there about him, but the most convincing actually comes from three letters. The first letter written on June 9th, 1921, a little over a week after his death, stating that James Goings was killed in the recent disturbances there, referring to Tulsa. The second letter from the Veterans Administration in November 1921 stated that the time of his death was during the recent race riots at Tulsa. The third is an inquiry on behalf of his sister years later, stating that he was killed on June 1st, 1921. When it comes to James Goings, we don't know where he is buried. He could be buried at Oak Lawn, but we do not know. And I'll let Allison talk a little more about that and what else the other things our team needs to do to make this connection. But this is an incredible discovery. Before I pass this to Dr. Stackelbeck, I do want to mention that the teams you see here today are conducting so much research on this era and the massacre. It's good that that changed our city. As they do this, they are not only making groundbreaking discoveries like the ones I just mentioned, but they're helping create a clearer picture of what happened in 1921. As you've seen, they are requesting VA records, they're requesting death certificates, and they're requesting anything that may have been written about the victims we're looking for. Online right now, and we'll be sending this out after we're done, you can see 3 additional updates to the Tulsa Race Massacre victims who over the years have been mentioned in various contexts and in various ways, but we want to call attention to them again. While some of these updates are just confirming what has already been reported, some of these findings have helped fix and update surnames of Tulsa Race Massacre victims based on this additional research. It's a lot to go into right now, especially with a torn up voice. But that information can be found on our 1921 Graves website, and it clearly deserves everybody's, or it certainly deserves everybody's attention. With that, I'll bring to the microphone Dr. Steckelbeck to talk a little more about the framework from this past year and where we go from here. Then I'll pass it over to Carrie and drink some water.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to start by thanking Mayor Nichols for his support of our team and our proposal to continue the unfinished work of this investigation. I also wish to extend our team's appreciation for the past and we hope ongoing support of the City Council, the North Tulsa community, and the citizens, all citizens of Tulsa. The following descriptions of individual burials of particular interest from the 2024 season that I'm going to discuss draw from the osteological evaluations conducted by Dr. Phoebe Stubblefield of the C.A. Pound Human Identification Lab at the University of Florida and her team, archaeological documentation and descriptions provided by the Oklahoma Archaeological Survey at the University of Oklahoma and the Stantec consulting firm, and specialized analyses on recovered bullets, other artifacts, and wood samples. This information appears in the now released executive summary of the 2024 field season, with more extensive details in the forthcoming full technical report, the big blown out document. I want to especially acknowledge the work of Dr. Douglas Scott, a noted expert on historic munitions who identified the bullets recovered from the individuals I'm going to discuss today, as well as the previously recovered gunshot victims. To date, archaeological excavations in Section 20 have resulted in the documentation of at least 193 graves in Section 20 of Oaklawn Cemetery. Among these burials, 28 individuals are of interest because they fit at least 2 of the characteristics from our target profile. First is evidence of trauma. Second, are they male? And third, are they interred in a simple wooden burial container? As a reminder, this target profile does not preclude consideration of other individuals as potential victims, but it provides our team with a historical framework to differentiate those burials that are most likely to be potential massacre victims and warrant exhumation and forensic analyses versus those individuals who were non-victims and were buried in Oaklawn respectfully, both before and after the event. We recovered 2 gunshot victims, you might recall this, in previous seasons, burials 27 and 42. With the 2024 field season, we recovered the remains of 4 additional individuals with gunshot wounds who are likely victims of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. These are burials 135, 157, 194, and 195. Please note that some of the details that I'm getting ready to share are graphic and disturbing. Sorry, I just have to pause for a moment. The individual in burial 135 was a middle-aged adult male in his 30s to 40s. He was buried in a simple wooden casket that was significantly larger than necessary for the size of the individual. The recovery of a copper rivet and textile fragments around his abdomen and pelvis suggests that he was clothed at the time of interment. He was the victim of multiple gunshot wounds to his lower body, including pellets from a shotgun and a .32 caliber lead bullet that was fired from a Colt Smith & Wesson or a Winchester firearm. In addition to his gunshot wounds, he may have also suffered blunt force trauma to the face. In Dr. Stubblefield's words, this individual received a potentially disabling shotgun blast to the legs and feet, probably followed by the abdominal gunshot wound that would have caused prolonged death. Burial 157 is that of a young adult male, perhaps in his early 20s, who suffered multiple gunshot wounds. One bullet recovered from this individual was a small deformed lead shot pellet, possibly hardened with tin or antimony. This individual was interred in a simple wooden casket that was too small for his stature. The individual in burial 194 was a male in his 30s or 40s who suffered multiple gunshot wounds from 2 guns, based on the recovery of a .22 caliber bullet from his thorax and a .38 caliber bullet from his pelvis. He was wearing a ring on his left hand at the time of burial. The context of his burial was highly unusual compared to others in the burial population. Portions of the skeletal remains were articulated, but out of anatomical position. He appears to have been buried in a semi-flexed position with his knees bent towards his chest. No other burials documented to date have displayed this kind of positioning. He was buried in a crate that was repurposed as a casket. It was a large container that was far too large for the decedent. The individual in burial 195 was also an adult male, possibly middle-aged in his 30s or 40s. Dr. Stubblefield's assessment is that this individual received a potentially disabling shotgun blast to a leg and possibly received a blast to the torso as well, probably followed by the abdominal gunshot wound that would have caused a prolonged death. A cranial gunshot wound is also possible. According to munitions specialist Dr. Scott, minimally, this person was shot with at least one .38 caliber firearm, one .38 special caliber firearm, and a shotgun. He was exposed to burning, which resulted in substantial charring and destruction of the remains. Several elements were missing from the burial, including his hands, feet, and portions of the skull. He was buried in a rectangular container, wooden container, probably a crate. Intermingled with his remains were objects that likely derived from the scene of his recovery, including carbonized timber fragments of larch wood, probably architectural debris, as identified by our paleoethnobotanist, Dr. Jennifer Haney. Confirmation of the identities of these individuals and our other persons of interest requires the support of potential descendants from across the country and here in Tulsa to participate in the DNA and genetic genealogical investigation by Intermountain Forensics and their many partners, as you will hear shortly from Allison. Individuals exhumed during the 2022 to 2024 field seasons were reinterred and honored with a ceremony on November 12, 2024. Additional archaeological excavations and forensic examinations have been proposed by our team to more thoroughly recover likely massacre victims who are buried in Oak Lawn Cemetery, including 3 as yet unrecovered burned victims that we are anticipating based on the death certificate data. Specifically, we propose to expand our excavation block to more fully encompass the space between our previous excavations and the western fence line and fill some small gaps that are adjacent to likely victims and other persons of interest. Archaeologists from the Oklahoma Archaeological Survey and Stantec propose to use the same methods that we've employed in the past during previous field seasons to remove overburden under the watchful eyes of our professional monitors and community representatives. And here I want to especially acknowledge the work of Miss Brenda Nels-Alford, who has been very capably performing that duty over the last several years, and we very much appreciate that. She's not the only one, but we will also continue to carefully expose any graves that are encountered and meticulously excavate and document those individuals who are candidates to be exhumed and examined by Dr. Stubblefield and her team in the on-site forensic laboratory. So with that, I will hand it off to Allison.
Thank you, Carrie. I'd like to first start with an acknowledgement of the entire genealogy team. Mayor Nichols said Allison's team, but really it's a huge team comprised of more than 30 pro bono genealogists from the organizations of Intermountain Forensics, DNA Doe Project, DNA Detectives, Identifinders International, Moxie Forensics, and DNA Labs International, who was also the sequencing partner for Burial 180 in November of last year. We also want to thank the Gillespie family, who were so generous in sharing family information and undergoing DNA comparison to Burial 180. Mr. George Melvin Gillespie was a resident of Payne County, Oklahoma in 1920. He does not have any known direct descendants, but he does have living nieces and nephews and other extended family members who agreed to provide DNA samples for our team to compare. Justina Cook, the team leader for Burial 180, worked tirelessly to research the Gillespie family and sent our local outreach specialist, Liz Marshall, on many trips through Oklahoma seeking records and family members. As Mayor Nichols announced, we do not know the circumstances of Mr. Gillespie's death, but we hope someone in the community may know of a family story that includes the Gillespie family and will contact our team at the website tulsa1921dna.org. Turning to the second genealogical announcement now, the newly named Tulsa Race Massacre victim, Mr. James Goings. It is through a family story shared with our team, not DNA, that we first became aware of the story of his death circulated within the family of his wife. Our team sent a records request to the National Archives at St. Louis that resulted in letters confirming the death of Mr. Goings during the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre that the mayor has already spoken about. Mr. Goings had no descendants. There are no living relatives of his siblings either. We are working on finding more distant relatives of Mr. James Goings so that DNA can be compared to all of the burials with our team. We want to compare specifically to Burial 135, which is one of the burials Carrie just spoke about, as many variations of the Goings, Gowen, Gowen with a W, and Gowens surnames are seen in the mid-range to distant DNA relatives of Burial 135. This could be an unrelated coincidence, but it is something that our genealogy team wants to delve into with additional DNA comparisons. Outreach to various Goins and Goings family groups is ongoing. Additionally, we hope family members might see this announcement and contact our team. James Goings was living in Arkansas and Alabama. So those two states are of particular importance for Mr. James Goings, the victim himself. I can't stress enough how much we appreciate the families, community members, and descendants of Greenwood who share their stories and DNA with our team. Mr. James Goings can be properly named as a Tulsa Race Massacre victim going forward because of a shared story, but his final resting place can only be established through DNA. And that's true for all massacre victims at this point. We start the investigative genetic genealogy process for each burial by receiving a list of DNA relatives from the family history DNA databases of Family Tree DNA and GED Match. That's GED Match. If you have a DNA test, a family history DNA test, elsewhere, you can use that data to have your DNA compared to the burials at the two databases I just mentioned, Family Tree DNA and gedmatch.com. A video showing the process is available, as is help from any member of our genealogy team. We will watch for your loved one as we research each burial, and we will work to provide you with the information that has been denied so long. Thank you. Speaking next is Mrs. Brenda Nels Alford, a member of the descendant community.
Good afternoon. I'd like to start by saying that growing up in the Greenwood community was one of the happiest times of my life. However, when I heard about the Tulsa Race Massacre and how it affected my family members and our community as a whole, I was absolutely devastated. And I wanted to do whatever I could do to honor their memories and their legacies in any way that I could. Therefore, when the opportunity became available to participate with the 1921 graves investigations, I could not resist. I remain so very humbled and honored to participate with the 1921 graves investigation and witness this day and time where we have made history by identifying the first victim, Mr. C.L. Daniel, and giving his family the opportunity to memorialize him in the way that they see fit and to give him the due respect that he so deserves. And also laying the groundwork for the possibility of giving other families that same opportunity. This work is truly unprecedented here in Tulsa and took nearly 100 years to come to fruition. The process to do this work, which includes difficult decision-making on top of the hard physical labor, is so truly appreciated. I can't thank you all enough. This is a wonderful team. Many of our family and community members left this earth never believing that we'd be doing this work, no less speaking about the Tulsa Race Massacre openly. However, I'm also so very proud of the fact that, as Ms. Allison has shared, we're giving families in our community the opportunity to know their history as it relates to the race massacre and otherwise. With this said, I'd like to thank Mayor Nichols and the City of Tulsa for the possible opportunity of having these processes move forward. For at the end of the day, myself and others in this community would not be here if it had not been for the survival of our family and community members. They gave us their best in spite of all that they endured, and I am forever grateful. Thank you again to the City of Tulsa, Mayor Nichols, and our entire team for your hard work and dedication.
Thank you, Brenda, Carrie, Allison. You know, I was sitting back here thinking as Carrie and Allison were talking, and I thought about what a blessing it is to have such amazing teams here doing this important work here in Tulsa. And once you hear them speak, you would think that they were from this community. And I think there's something about the care in which they've gone about their work that is really special, and I think representative of how important this is and how solemn it is, the work that they're doing. I also want to make sure, although he's not here, I think it is important that I do recognize Mayor Bynum. It was his leadership that helped get this going, and we're working to continue it, and obviously the work of Councilor Hall Harper and others. This was not necessarily an easy thing to undertake, even to make the decision to do it in the first place. And then certainly the follow-through is not easy as well. And every time we open up another truth and we find something new, those also aren't easy things to digest at times. They're important, but not easy. And so I reiterate how important it is, and I think that this community is showing the kind of courage it takes to do really, really hard things, because those hard things are necessary. And we're doing it with folks who are absolutely first class in how they're taking care and attention to the victims of the race massacre, and certainly how they take that care and the work they're doing with us every day. I do want to mention that Carol and our team and the Intermountain Forensics group all are here today, but they're also in town because they're hosting a third round of community engagement genealogy workshops this weekend starting on Friday. If you're watching this and anything about today strikes a chord, or if you're hearing this and you want to know how your family might fit into this work, and frankly you want to help, you've found today, if you're watching this, if you want to know how these connections are made, it really is through the engagement of the community, giving information, giving DNA, all those kinds of things. But Allison and her team are here. I guess, Allison, you said it's not your team. I guess I'm messing up again. But Allison and the team is here and available this weekend, and there are still plenty of spots available to sign up. You can see more information about those workshops and see how to sign up for those on our website, on the Greenwood Cultural Center's website. And now anybody who spoke today, and maybe even there might be a few people in the crowd, can respond to any questions that you might have.
And we are streaming live, so if you have a question, raise your hand and come use the microphone here. Elizabeth, if you can come to the mic.
I just want to make sure, so you have one person who's definitely identified for DNA, and then you have a second person who you think is one of the victims, and you're seeking more DNA to confirm that? Is that right?
That's correct. We'll have Allison come to the microphone.
I was not at the game, but I caught whatever was happening there clearly because all of a sudden I had to cough. Yes, we have one burial identified, burial 180, is identified by DNA. The announcement about Mr. James Goings did not come to us through DNA. It was a family story, but his last name is so interesting to us just because we see that last name in the DNA relatives of burial 135. It may be a coincidence, but since we know that James Goings was a victim, and burial 135 is one of the burials that Carrie talked about, and now we see the surname, it's just something that we have to look into. We have to find the more distant relatives of Mr. James Going and see if they're willing to participate in the project with DNA so that we can see if James Goings, his relatives, are related to burial 135. That's a priority number one question for our team to answer. So, yes, the newly named Tulsa Race Massacre victim, he is a victim based on records and information of the time. The first letter that originated regarding his death is dated on June 9th, 1921. And then his own sister gave his date of death as June 1st, 1921. A descendant in his wife's family is the one that reached out to us and said, we have a family story that says her husband was a Mr. Goins and he died at the Tulsa Race Massacre. So James Goings is not currently tied by DNA to any of the burials, but he is most definitely a victim.
Next question. Ryan?
Mayor, you mentioned that we're headed back to Oaklawn Cemetery. I was just wondering if there's some sort of timeline for next steps for this investigation.
I think, did you refer to it earlier? Yeah.
So, of course, first and foremost, we're hoping to get approval of the budget so that we can go back. Once we do that, then our teams are going to be coming together to start talking about nailing down the specific dates. But our anticipation right now is, provided everything is in place, we would aim for late summer, early fall is what we're potentially looking at right now. But again, that's going to depend on just logistics and making sure that we can get everybody back in Tulsa for that work.
With Box 23, I'm not sure who exactly can answer this question, but when you all go back to Oaklawn or when you find, like Mr. James, what's the next steps when you find these remains? Do they go back to the family? Do they have a proper burial, or are you all still using them for research?
Dr. Stapleton.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm feeling short again.
You're good.
Okay. I think I lost an inch on the plane. But the
I can't talk, but I can move the microphone.
thank you very much, and thank you all for your attention, all of those out there streaming. I appreciate your attention. It helps us recreate this history, and thank you. We don't treat these, to answer your question, we don't treat these individuals like specimens. I will say we derive specimens from them, but those are the elements or pieces that we send for DNA analysis, which is a destructive process, and conceivably can actually consume. We have had that happen where we've consumed all we've had and had to resample individuals. But at the end of every field season, we prepare a bundle with their remains. It's a fabric bundle, and Brenda and I, We bundle them back together, and with any objects, shards of their coffin, personal effects, except for the bullets, we rebury them with those items when the next reburial happens. They don't leave the cemetery ground. And I personally have really appreciated that. I mean, I've been in forensic anthropology for, well, we'll say officially since '96, and I've gone from the time period when any dead body was an object all the way to now where you're only mostly an object. And I am very grateful to give these decedents the chance to have the respect they definitely did not receive at their burial.
Next question.
It was obviously difficult to hear when you were talking about what happened with these victims. You specified the casket size on each of them. So my question is, what's the significance of those caskets being too big or too small? And then, is this the most trauma that you've seen with all of the victims that you all have talked about so far?
I'm a little taller than Phoebe, so I can raise this back up. That's an excellent question. So first, definitely the most number of individuals in any one field season that we have recovered that have clear evidence of trauma, yes. So again, to the point that the mayor raised, we are definitely in the right area geographically. These individuals, 194 and 195 are immediately adjacent to one another, but everybody else, there's some spatial distance actually between them. There's an overall area, but they're not immediately adjacent to one another. So again, this is why we're expanding our work. As to the caskets, it is significant. So we are paying close attention to the size and dimensions and construction style of the caskets, in part because that helps us understand the extent to which these may have been commercially manufactured, or they were produced probably, by hand and likely at the time of burial. And if you see a degree of variability in the construction style or in the sizes, were they built to suit the size of the individual, which was actually common practice in the funeral industry at that point in time. It was actually a point in the funeral industry that they wanted to make sure that they had the correct dimensions, they had a correct length for the individual, so they knew what size to make that casket if it was not going to be one that was a commercially produced one, right? If they were going to make it themselves, it was a point of pride for a funeral director to make sure that they did not get that wrong, right? So when we see individuals who have been crammed into a casket that is too small for his stature, where they had to adjust the orientation of his body in order to make him fit, that does not speak to respectful kind of treatment. That speaks to a situation of some form of expediency, of using a casket that's available and not necessarily built to suit that individual. Perhaps something that you would anticipate if you're looking at having a large number of people that you're trying to bury all at once and a limited supply of caskets. You're going to use whatever you can, right? The opposite of that is also true in terms of when you start seeing the use of crates, shipping crates. That is unusual because that, again, is speaking to a degree of expediency where you're not taking the time to actually construct a casket for that individual in a normal, respectful manner if they had died under regular circumstances and are being buried by their family, right? So if you're just expediently using a crate, perhaps maybe you're running out of stock of other caskets that you can that are available to use. You might start using other kinds of boxes and repurposing them, such as a shipping crate. So the fact that we now have 3 individuals buried in shipping crates, also telling. The fact that all 3 of those individuals are also gunshot victims, very telling. So that's one of the reasons that we're paying close attention to that.
Good question. Any other questions? Randy?
So, I have a couple. One of them is, I wondered about the 2 men for whom there were actually grave markers. If DNA was taken on those, Mr. Eddie Locker.
Reuben Everett and Eddie Lockhart.
Yeah. they're considered identified, I guess. What's the status of those two men?
We're flipping a quarter. Right, hold on. We're figuring this out. We're flipping a quarter on this. The microphone's
I
already
can
set.
start, and then it might be that Phoebe may pick up on this. We'll see. Okay, so I will backtrack a little bit because the answer to your question. So with Reuben Everett and Eddie Lockhart, these are two named individuals who are. But these are the two headstones, only two headstones for massacre victims that are known, right? We had relocated those to facility. We removed them during our excavation process because we did not want to damage the headstones while we were doing our excavations. In the process of our excavations, what we have learned with each season is that the headstones have been moved. They are not necessarily to be trusted in terms of the accuracy of their current location. And we know this because there is a substantial amount of fill that has been brought into this low-lying area. So what we've learned is that there are two relic stream channels that run along the western edge of the cemetery and the southern edge of the cemetery. They're not visible now, but they're definitely still there. And I'm guaranteeing right now that it's probably a sloppy, wet mess out at Oaklawn because of it, right? But with that, what we have seen geologically speaking in terms of the soils, there are soils that don't belong there, that are not from the cemetery, that were brought in to bring that ground surface up to where it is today. And that's over multiple episodes. So we can look at changes in the structure of the soils and the color and components of the soil that lets us know that there were multiple different fill episodes over time to fill in those stream channels. But what that meant then is, so we have some indication of what the original ground surface was, which was probably about a meter below the current ground surface. And so if you can imagine, so somewhere around the 1920s, right, you have a ground surface and you're putting your headstones in place. And then if you bring in a bunch of fill, they're daylighting in some cases, and this happens for many cemeteries even today. And typically what you'll do is you'll daylight the markers and bring them up to the ground surface. So those are still visible, even though you're not going to move the people that are buried beneath, right? You're just adding dirt on top of that. What we're finding is that sometimes those markers were daylighted and sometimes they were not. And so some were left buried in their original position and others were brought to the ground surface in some form or fashion. But what we're also finding is that it is very challenging to trust that they are in their accurate location. And as a reminder too, is like section 20, there's not nearly as many markers that are visible on the ground surface compared to other portions of the cemetery. This may be a partial explanation for that, is what we're encountering through the archaeology. As a result of that, when we encountered the graves that are associated with the burial, where the markers were for Reuben and Eddie, we exposed those initially to determine, do they seem consistent with the information that we have from their death certificates? And they did not. And so we proceeded with the exhumation process, careful excavation and documentation and exhumation process, and then Dr. Stubblefield's team proceeded with the forensic work on those two individuals.
We have time for about one more question.
Oh,
Wait, I have one.
we got
I need to.
one addition.
Yeah, just
I didn't know this would be so complicated.
no. Well, I mean,
Maybe
sorry,
you only ask complicated questions.
but to follow up on the forensic exam on those two burials, those burials we numbered 194 and 195. So you may remember those numbers. They were the individuals in crates, and that was the first tip-off. But if you go back and look at the death certificate data for Reuben Everett and Ed Lockhart, they had gunshot wounds, just gunshot wounds. And these individuals did not have just gunshot wounds.
So they're probably race massacre victims, but they're probably not Everett and.
No, and I mean, from our last season, these were the 194, 195, 135. Sorry, I don't have them in order. I mean, 157 is a very interesting gunshot wound victim, but 135, 194, 195 demonstrate the kind of gunshot wounds you might expect if you were hunting people. And so that's one, they're just very much fit our narrative.
So let me ask one other thing real quickly. So it was mentioned that they're all not in like a cluster, the people. So with your experience working in cemetery, does that indicate they were, like, these were considered empty plots and they were going through and putting people in empty plots as opposed to just, digging a bunch of holes in a row?
Yeah, but keep in mind that, I mean, we say Potter's Field, colored Potter's Field, right? I mean, if you look in the original ledger, it's called the colored Potter's Field, section 20. But it is not a Potter's Field in that sense. It was a single grave burial ground. So you could buy a plot and get buried there. Now, I'm not saying that from, city records said you could buy a plot. I'm saying that because we find family groupings. For some of the marked graves that we do have, the Gray family, father and his daughter, they died in separate years, but they're within visual range. They're only like a row apart. There's another, two brother-in-laws, Phineas, I can't remember his last name. At any rate, they're they're a row apart. And how do you do that in a potter's field? But if you can pick your burial. And so it also is an orderly burial ground. There are no intrusive burials that we found yet. No cross burial. Everyone is buried east to west, and I think we have the sexton at the time to thank for that. But it does not fit that vision. If you have my flawed vision of every time I say Potter's Field, I still have to go. It's not like that. It's not like that. It was an orderly area. We just don't have records for it.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. We'll have more
Thank you.
information on our graves website, cityofTulsa.org/1921 graves.